I, for the longest time, I thought it was a dream, because, when you grow up, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen. It doesn't make sense. But um, I was always often reminded by one of my parents who was very religious. They were convinced it was a miracle from God. And to keep my faith on track, they would constantly remind me, remember the rose. So I couldn't really categorize that in my brain as a dream or, childhood make believe because they wouldn't let me. So it most certainly happened.
Yes, and many children see them too. About 75% of the world's children today are being born with etheric vision. And when your children talk with people and have daydream playmates, the chances are they are actually speaking to some of these people. Because these angels or angelic forces or nature spirits, as they're often called, will often make themselves seen.
Whatever it is, it looks every bit like a fairy and very little like anything else.
But seriously, it kind of looks like a fairy. Just kind of doesn't look like your standard mall.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
But I wasn't gonna make this video until I looked a little bit closer and I realized after it lands behind my bench, it disappears. And it just vanishes. And in fact, I went outside to look, to try to find it, to see if it was trash, to see if it was a bug, to see if it was a leaf, like trying to figure out what it could be, and it was gone. It just vanished.
What's that? Yeah. What's what? Yeah, look. Right up there. Insect or something.
Is that an insect? Let's have a look. What is it?
I don't know. Oh my god!
Oh.
What happens to people who cut down fairy thorns?
Did you see it? Huh? Did you see it?
Yeah, me and him saw it.
What'd you see?
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I'm not going to BS you guys. One of my partners said they saw something fall out of the sky too, so that's why I'm kind of curious. Did you see anything land in your backyard?
The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real.
Welcome everybody tonight to Fascinating Fae. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Misty from Pennsylvania with a very remarkable story. But before I get to the brief on the story, Misty, I just wanted to ask, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well, thank you for asking.
I'm really happy to hear that. I'm a little under the weather, but I'm going to soldier through this particular interview because it was very interesting to me, and I've been excited to talk to Misty for a few days. So we've talked on this show about the various manifestations of the Fae, fairies, elementals, etc. Along that path, we've gotten at times into discussions about the nature of reality itself, all of which is a very deeply interconnected set of, facts, philosophies, theories, and experiences to pick apart and to try to assemble into a working logic. And so tonight, as we invite Misty's story, we're going to be receiving a very remarkable story of all that I just sort of talked about in full effect. And so Misty is going to share with us tonight a story of a very remarkable flower. And I'm just going to leave it there because I want Misty to have the chance to tell this experience fully in her own words. So Misty, again, one of the things I like to just remind my guests of when I start the show is at Fascinating Fae. Well, basically, I saw a fairy, so I've started this show because I'm totally fascinated by what I saw, and I started it believing other people have seen them too. So I'm collecting stories, but we are not here, and especially yourself, you're not here to convince anybody of anything today. Neither am I. No one's an expert on fairies. We're just here to share stories. So just wanted to say that. And then basically just invite you, please, to provide some context to the audience about, when this happened, how old you were. Tell us about this remarkable flower, if you could, please, for myself and for the audience listening.
Thank you. I also hope you feel better. I feel a little bad that you are sick while we host this interview, but uh, hopefully you'll feel better afterwards after we talk about something we are both clearly very passionate and interested in. So, I was anywhere between 6 or 8 years old, definitely a child. Um, and the day was very cold. Um, it it was not the time for things to be blooming, and I was always a kid who loved flowers, especially roses. They bloomed in abundance in our neighborhood by our home, and it was always delightful. I loved it, and when they went away, I missed them, and having one would make me very happy. So, um, we were about to leave. We were outside before we were loading into the car to drive off and get our day started. I looked and was sad to see no roses on the bush. And I just said, how kids do. Like, I wish I had a rose. And it was as simple as that. Nothing big, just casual. I'd like this thing because it would make me happy. And we left. And we came back that night, and it was even colder because the temperature drops, especially in winter. And on the bush was one solitary bloomed rose. It had just appeared there. It was there. Um, just the one, and it was pretty amazing. I, for the longest time, I thought it was a dream, because, when you grow up, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen. It doesn't make sense. But um, I was always often reminded by one of my parents who was very religious. They were convinced it was a miracle from God. And to keep my faith on track, they would constantly remind me, remember the rose. So I couldn't really categorize that in my brain as a dream or, childhood make believe because they wouldn't let me. So it most certainly happened.
That last bit of information around your encounter is almost as fascinating as the experience itself. So you're very fortunate, I think, to have parents who were aware of the remarkable nature of this flower blooming. I would go so far as to say you're also fortunate to have parents that would remind you of it and affirm that it was a remarkable experience. I want to ask you some questions about the flower because, looking at a flower is a pretty pedestrian thing. But in any way, to your recollection, and it's okay, Misty, if there's not a lot of detail that you can recall. I know this happened a long time ago. Was there anything additionally unusual about the flower outside of its solitary blooming? I guess what I would ask, was it larger in any way? Was there anything else unusual about it that you can recall with relation to its appearance at all?
You're certainly correct about how just observing a flower, it's a relatively mundane part of our world. We see them all the time when the time is right for them to be there and don't think much about it. I can't say that this rose stood out in particular. I think the fact that it was there at all was, the main showstopper, if you will. Um, I know that we, of course, picked it and kept it, and it later got pressed into a book or a Bible at some point. Sadly, it was lost in one of our moves. Um, but I don't think it stood out in particular. It was from one of those rose bushes that has roses that are like this a really pale pink sort of color. That's the color of roses that bloomed on the bushes that this one came from.
Thank you for letting me know that you picked it, because that was going to be one of my questions. The reason I was going to ask if you picked it is because my obvious curiosity leads me to want to determine if it's a real flower, meaning something you can pick and later press, which you've already totally clarified for me, or if it was something that wasn't there the next day. But clearly you've already made that distinction. So I find that very interesting, that the plant itself has done this unusual biological function and bloomed a full rose. Also, I'm not like a expert in botany by any stretch of the imagination, but I did grow and run a medical marijuana cannabis dispensary for almost a decade, and so I have some intimate knowledge of how things flower. And I guess my point, to just build on what you're saying and to really affirm the unusual nature of this, it takes some degree of energy for a flower to fully bloom. Roses don't necessarily even bloom in a single day. The flower bud emerges, opens. That process can take several days before you get the fully bloomed flower. So you're both seeing something that shouldn't be there in season, and something that has accelerated the degree to which it's presenting itself considerably. I'm
Yes.
likening this to many other flowers. There are some that do open and kind of bloom in close to a day, but a rose is a far more complex flower than that. So that's very interesting. Can I ask you, if you don't mind, a little bit about your mother and the religious perspective that she had on the event? As I go to do that, one of the things that's really interesting about fairies, or the fae in general, I guess you could say, is that there's a deep association with the angelic. I mean, even if you want to do something as basic as look on Wikipedia, there's entries in the official Wikipedia page on fairies that talk about them being angelic, a fallen angel, like an earthbound angelic force of some type. And so when your mother was talking about it as a miracle, was she fully in and sort of firmly in the realm of a Judeo-Christian perspective on that, or was there anything that sort of bled outside of that she communicated with you at your young age?
Well, the parent who had very firmly rooted beliefs, I, if it's okay with you, I won't say if it was my mom or dad, for the sake of privacy. Just that one of them was held very, very powerful faith, and they most certainly they were convinced without a doubt that it was God's doing, and it was a little miracle for me. Um, and I feel that this not only was it their faith that inspired them to think that, but regarding myself, they're kind of the mindset that I was going to do like big godly things. There's been some weirdness that kind of followed and surrounded my family in general, and that most likely like bolstered their their grip on their faith.
Misty, may I tell you something?
Yes.
In the past 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes that you were speaking, outside of my house, I started to hear this weird noise, and I live right by a giant bay window, and I've turned to look outside, and there has erupted the most incredible deployment of hail. There's like, the entire path is white out in hail the size of Tic Tacs, and I can hear it rattling off the window and the fence at the entrance to my patio. And that just started happening as we're having this conversation about out-of-season winter flowers and the angelic. Gosh, whoa, I'm looking at it right now. It's really piling up fast.
That's pretty amazing.
It's almost just sort of petering out right now, too, as I talk about it. Interesting. That's really remarkable right in and of itself. Wow. And I apologize if I had assumed it was a mother or father. I actually realized you didn't actually specify that detail.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I'm not a professional interviewer, a professional podcaster at all. I'm a guy who saw a fairy, and I am doing my best to yeah, yeah, thank you for that laugh too.
No problem. We are all good here.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm trying my best to be as empathetic and constructive as a listener as I can as I host this show, in order to well, both, I don't think saying to someone, well, I don't believe you, is a good way to hear a story. And also, like, I saw one, and it can be difficult to describe this stuff or talk about this stuff. And it does take a degree of courage. So I do think it's brave of you to come forward. I can hear that reluctance and the desire to have some privacy, and I really respect and appreciate that. And again, definitely not trying to reveal anyone's identity as part of this show. I don't think that's an important part. For me, it actually, all the knowledge I need is in the voice. I can hear the truth in the voice when I speak to people. I don't need to see them, know anything about them previously. I can hear their voice. And I can hear the same similar qualities in your story and voice that I've heard in other people's who have seen remarkable things. With all that said, Misty, may I ask a few more questions if that's okay with you, please?
Of course, ask away.
Thank you. And again, thank you for your time and being here. The audience listening is growing for this show pretty rapidly. There's a untold story, it would appear, of, basically interdimensional, unexplainable phenomena taking place. I know you had mentioned a moment ago some other strangeness related to your family. I do want to kind of move back to the flower with a final question I had about it in a moment, but would you be willing to talk about any of the other related, or perhaps not related, but still similarly strange feeling things that you alluded to a moment ago, please?
I certainly can. Now, mind you, this information is secondhand because, I don't know, maybe by the time I was born, the supernatural had its fill of my family, because my life has basically been pretty normal, like, aside from the rose and maybe like a few like little funny coincidences and stuff. I can't really say I've ever seen or noticed anything like really big or life changing. Um, with my parents and an older sibling, when that sibling was a child, um, oh goodness, the things that would happen to them, pretty out of this world. Like the stories abound. Um, uh, my sibling had an imaginary friend that scared them uh, so badly that as a very small child, they literally leapt an entire flight of stairs to get away from it. Uh, the one parent, um, the parent with the very strong faith, and mostly on their side of the family, they would they would see things, they would hear things. There was it the veil that allows you to either see through or not see things. I guess theirs was very thin because their experiences were pretty wild. And even the other parent who wasn't as prone to seeing and hearing things had even experienced stuff. Uh, yeah.
Thank you for, sort of dipping your toes into some of those stories for us. I'm not so sure that childhood imaginary friends in all circumstances are as imaginary as the adults are assigning them to be. When you say the veil, one of the things that I was going to kind of ask you about, so actually your use of the word veil is a good opportunity for me to segue into some additional thoughts and feelings I'd like to ask you about. I do agree there's like a veil. I would call it a veil. I think that's a totally useful word. Because a veil is somewhat able to be seen through, if you think about a wedding veil, for example. But it is obscuring the beautiful thing behind it. And so a veil is a very good analogy for that reason, and I think you've done a good job with that. Well, I guess what I'm trying to ask, excuse me, there's my sore throat showing up. I guess what I'm trying to ask, Misty, is if you can be so kind as to do your best to recall a particular detail for me. When you first saw this flower that you must have known, okay, I asked for this because you're now seeing it. Do you recall at all what effect that had on you, how you felt emotionally, if there was a ability to recall that detail?
I will do my best. I I think I was pleased to see the rose. Little kid brains are weird because we may have like they may have an idea of what is normal and what is not, but I think when you're young enough, what is quote unquote normal hasn't fully solidified. So when something is a novel, it it doesn't really register as much as it would with an adult, if that makes sense. So I remember being like pretty happy that the rose was there, but I don't think I was in a position to appreciate like just how special it was.
Yeah, that's probably totally fair given your young age. And I do find it remarkable that your parent was there with you. You join a growing list of people that have a second witness to their remarkable, inexplicable event. And when that happens, I always think to myself, there's something to the message that delivers itself in the presence of a confirmer, of a witness, so that the person whom the event was for will never be able to dismiss it. And I think you talked about that almost right at the beginning of your storytelling around this. So moving back to the concept of veil, and there's no right answer here, there's no wrong answer. I truly don't believe that this is something that people know about, and I'm sometimes a little bit hesitant when people do say they know, because I'm consider myself a pretty objective, smart guy, and I definitely don't know. So when someone says they know about this stuff, I go like, okay.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
Yeah, so with that caveat, what do you think was going on here? So I know your parent is talking about it as a miracle or being related to a godly thing, which is totally legitimate. This is your experience and something you've had the time to ponder for a long time, it would appear, you're no longer a child, so you've had some time to think about this. What do you think was happening? Is there any insights on the mechanism of this occurring? Did the plant hear you? I mean, I'm just curious if you could kind of go into that type of thinking for me openly a little bit, if that would be okay, Misty.
Oh, sure. Well, hmm, I I guess I really don't know what happened. Although I do definitely believe in the fae and the supernatural for sure, just because I've gone my entire life never really seeing much of it. I feel like too many people are saying the same things without being like related to each other, if that makes sense. Like, what's the saying? A thousand Chinamen can't be wrong. Uh, um, so I think it's entirely possible that it was a a spirit of nature. Something certainly could have heard me, and maybe they resonated with my appreciation and love for nature and decided to indulge just for that one special time. That's certainly the explanation I'd like to go with.
I feel like your explanation is full of intuition and truth, and I really appreciate you having the courage to speculate, especially on an event so long ago. What definitely is so remarkable about your event, outside of the rose itself, is the thing we're trying to touch on, which is like, how does this work? Did it hear you? Did nature itself hear you? Can I leave you with a thought? And I've said this a dozen times, I feel like, just about when I have made this show, but I will say it again here. The very last guest that I spoke to was a woman from Kentucky named Susan. And as she was talking to me, she said, "I think of myself as a hedge witch." And I was like, well, what's that? I got to ask about that. So later I asked her, what's a hedge witch? And she went on to talk about a very interesting set of things that have come up a lot, but I hadn't really connected fully in my own head. And speaking with you, there's such a standout detail here, and I'll get to it in a second. And I'd love for you to, on your own, listen to Susan's episode, so I won't ruin an important detail here for you. But
Thank you.
yeah, at the opening of this show, I have a clip from a BBC documentary from the 1950s. And in Ireland, back in the day, they had a real strong concept of fairy thorns. And so the clip is like, what happens to people who cut down fairy thorns? And it's the reporter from BBC, asking this question in the town. And they go on to talk about how they actually move the path of the road to accommodate this fairy thorn. And, that was the whole BBC report, was like, these people don't want to cut down this fairy thorn in order to put this road through. So they end up actually leaving the thorn in place and totally diverting the road. This is back in the 1950s. But why I'm sort of segueing, and I'll just talk about Susan a second now because she's talking about hedge witchery. So the guy is asking about fairy thorns. And as she's talking about hedge witchery, she goes into hedge witchery with some more detail and starts to talk about how the thorn plants, the hawthorn, the elderberry, the raspberry, the blackberry, all the thorny plants, the roses, are part of hedges in many cases, interspliced with the hedge. And roses especially are hedgerows, like of roses pretty much. They back into hedges, or they're part of hedge gardens a lot of the time, and they're a thorny plant. And fairies are deeply associated with plants that have thorns, according to Susan. And after I talked with her, I did a bunch of research, and she's right. And that's where the idea of fairy thorns come from. So I just wanted to share that with you, because you are talking about a thorned plant performing a miracle.
That was actually fun to learn. I was unaware of that connection, so learning that makes me pretty happy.
If I may, I was unaware of it until I talked to Susan last night. And we were supposed to talk last night, correct? Can you just confirm that for the audience?
That's true.
And we didn't. And so instead, I got time with Susan, but now I'm talking with you, and I wouldn't have had that to tell you if I had talked with you last night. So I don't know how the fairies are doing it, but
That's pretty awesome.
yeah, they gave me back-to-back firefighters, Misty. They gave me a wilderness fire from Montana, and then another one from Oregon the next night. And then now they gave me a hedge witch who taught me all about thorns and how thorned plants are deeply associated with fairies. Basically, like, all thorned plants are home to fairies in lore. And here you are talking about a thorned plant performing a miracle. I do find that, a little bit beyond coincidence. I'm a pragmatic person and I'm a skeptic, so maybe it's just coincidence, but hey, it feels like it isn't. So I gotta say it out loud.
Hey, I love my synchronicities. I do.
Well, if what we're touching on is true and the nature of reality is a little bit more mysterious and interconnected than it first appears, all of what we're talking about, suggests something more is going on. And you and other guests are all confirming my own sighting through these various touch points that affirm the incredible nature of fairies, the incredible nature of the supernatural, the incredible nature of the spirit-bound,
Yes.
the earthbound spirits, the earthbound dimensions, the earthbound realms, the earthbound things separated by veils, as I think you would put, which is really well said. As I go to sort of leave this conversation with you here tonight, Misty, and again, my sincere appreciations for the dialogue. Thanks for letting me jump in with some of my own thoughts and stories. My voice has gotten surprisingly through this interview much better than I thought, and that hailstorm is totally going to be for a matter of record now on this show. So totally neat, totally cool. With all that said, with a wide range of discussion points having happened here tonight, I do like to ask all of my guests the same question. And similarly, no wrong answer, no right answer. You did mention earlier that you've had an interest in the Fae. So my question for you is, what do you think fairies are, Misty?
That is the $1,000,000 question, and it keeps me up at night. I'm not even exaggerating because while I've never seen one, I've never interacted with one, at least not to the degree that many other people have, like outright seeing things, like actual, little people or winged beings. None of that for me, but I'm pretty sure they're there, and trying to understand where they fit into all of this reality thing has just it's confounded me. It's often frustrating because I have a very logical mind, always have. I want answers, and the answers aren't forthcoming, and that can be very frustrating. So all I can ever do is guess. I think so far the closest I've gotten is that they're certainly closely tied to nature, very spiritual, like in nature themselves, because they'll appear and disappear at will, and they're very much concerned with guarding nature, especially like specific areas where I think I guess they would gather or is sacred to them for whatever reason. I figure, if humans and animals, the fauna of this world can have their spirits and their ties to the other side like that, why not the flora? Um, I think they could be a form of mobilization since plants can't really move. Um, uh, for for them to help the plants, help them stay maintained and healthy, to help keep balance in nature because a lot of things could go wrong. If a lot of people who are religious look to intelligent design to explain all of this beauty and splendor in the natural world, and maybe they're a little right, but maybe it has less to do with uh, if you'll pardon me, the Sky Daddy, and maybe a little more to do with some intelligence in the nature itself that is currently beyond us.
Wow, a few things. First of all, Sky Daddy, I'm stealing that. That's great. Sky Person, let's just get with the times here in 2024. Anyway, jokes aside, one thing you said a moment ago was incredible to me, which is that you pondered if fairies are a type of mobilization of plants, since plants can't really move, and just like all sorts of things lit up in my brain as you said that. It's a really great thought. I'm really glad I got to hear that thought. That's an interesting thought.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think the Fae in general are confusing for a variety of reasons, because they shapeshift, they can do things like you're describing, which is manipulate real objects, especially natural ones, you know. And so there's not like an exactly.
I apologize. Something that often bothers me is that when they appear, they're often person shaped. You know, very similar body plan, whether they're like tiny and winged or like a dwarven type. Like the often, you know, head, shoulders, two arms, two legs. You know, um, when we see that amongst critters in nature, when you're scientific, you conclude that you know there's common ancestry there sometimes, and I wonder, this is what can be so confusing. If you'll indulge me for a moment, why are they always people shaped? Why aren't they shaped like something else? You know, when they do appear in front of people, like why did somebody uh look over and see a little old man dangling his feet in the water to keep cool because it's a hot summer day, but then he disappears once he notices he's being seen. Why would he need to do that if he was a spirit? You know, you get what I'm saying?
I do, and I've wondered the same thing. I'll let you know that when I saw my fairy, it was like a shape of a female, but it was a shape. And it was just a shape. It was just like a purple, light emanating shape. And I've made the joke, this is not an actual thing, but it kind of looks like the cutout of the woman sign on entrance to a washroom, to a female washroom. It wasn't wearing a dress or anything. It was just like it's more like like the type of silhouette of a woman you might see on a dump truck's mud flap.
Yeah.
But in between the two, like it was more soft and cartoony for sure in its definition, like a entrance to a bathroom, but it was definitely more obviously shaped like a person with some degree of person-like definition, especially in the head, body, and you could tell it was a woman's body. I just don't really know how else to put it. It was a lady fairy, and it was winged, and it was upright. And you also bring up like so many good points about common ancestry. I'll just say that again and I'll edit it. Excuse me. You also bring up some really good points with regards to common ancestry, because upright position, bipedalism, if you want to call it, not that fairies are walking, but the position is suggestive of something close to ourselves. And I think we're wired to recognize things in that position differently than things that are not. Precisely why it's so amusing to see like a circus bear walk to certain people who are into that kind of cruel entertainment. But you know, the idea of seeing something walk or be in a human position is immediately something which registers with us. You're correct. They are definitely described to me in many circumstances as having a quote unquote body of types: legs, arms, head, body, wings, sometimes not wings. Not every fairy that has been described to me is flying at all. Many are not. I would also say that others who are flying and are also ones that are not flying are described often more generally. Like the firefighter from Oregon says it looked like a pear. Didn't really have anything, and he was 5-6 feet from it at its closest. It just passed right in front of his face diagonally. And he said it was just like about a 6-inch tall pear, illuminated glowing ball. And I've heard other people say like they are sometimes orb-like, which may account for orb sightings. And I think, like, to answer your question, why do they disappear? Why do they appear as a person? As I go to answer your question, I want to just remind everybody listening, James doesn't know. I'm just guessing here. But I'm guessing from like a somewhat informed perspective, I guess you could say. And so to answer your question, I think that it's possible that, like, to the degree that we are inhabiting our own selves as a soul, and that we are an evolved type of soul on the planet, the form which we take of legs and arms and forward facing eyes and all this sort of stuff is both evolutionary, we're the key predator, but it's also like about how we as spirits are interacting with this world. I think fairies are also spirits. I think the reason they can disappear or are described to disappear, and I've had many credible witnesses describing them vanish before their eyes, and the reason they take such varied forms, some are light, some are dark, some glow, some don't, some are paper thin, a lot of them are paper thin, paper thin, two-dimensional, in fact. The reason there's so much variance is because I do think that the spirit consciousness of a fairy, if you think of our spirit consciousness as a human, like I said a second ago, we know it's inside of us, but we can't capture or jar it. We just know it's there. We know it's us. I think the spirit consciousness of a fairy, Misty, is an evolved spirit consciousness like us. And I think the reason they have, when they come into this realm, a fairly analogous shape to us is because arms, legs, and a head is efficient here on Earth. And they don't always do it perfectly by any means. Like, what I saw did not have any facial features. I've had many people describe no facial features. But I don't think they need the features. I think they're just, through a type of meditative energy, through a type of will, if you would, or a type of manifestation for which they are more capable of controlling than us, they are either ingressing into our realm of existence, or they are like bringing themselves into form through the sheer force of their will. And I do think that people can do it too, both like what you're talking about with your rose. I do think like there's an interface between reality and spiritual consciousness. And I think that fairies are one of many fully articulated spiritual consciousnesses. And I think that they just happen to be one that sometimes has form and sometimes doesn't. But to answer your question, I think that a shape like a man or a woman, just an upright shape of a person, is something you also hear about, not just with fairies, but with extraterrestrials and other interdimensionals. So why is everything upright with hands, eyes, and legs? I think somehow that's probably just the way. And this could be a mantid, this could be a gray, could be a Nordic. It seems like everything out there that's described, and many times fairies are that shape. And finally, just to add some thoughts, and sorry I've talked so much because this is really your interview.
That's all right.
And I'm enjoying talking with you. And and frankly, your voice is very pleasant. I deal with audio all the time, and I just really like your pace. I like your voice. It's just really nice, feminine, really nice pace. You're very thoughtful and articulate, and you've raised, 5 or 6 just amazing points tonight that are really sticking with me. Not the least of which is the plant mobilization thing. Anyway, so just to kind of wrap up here with all this thinking, I do think that fairies are individuals. I think that they take forms that they are in, sometimes like they are appearing as themselves, and I think other times they appear in other ways, such as your flower. And I think they don't speak English, I think they speak nature somehow.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I think they do it telepathically, like you're saying. I think the flora, the fauna are seeing them uninterrupted. I think it's us that have the veil on.
I am inclined to agree because trees, they can hang around for a long time, and that's a long time for any spiritual energy to I suppose gather itself and do its thing. I don't think it's an accident that trees specifically are often like these conduits for them, often heavily protected, especially if they're a lone tree like a hawthorn. So yeah, I agree.
Hawthorn, thorns again. Thorned.
Oh yes.
Yeah, thorned bushes. The fairies are, they're associated with them. Kind of makes me think, just, I mean, I probably have some research that I have to do here. Every time I talk, I feel like the audience is going to poop on me for like not knowing. But I mean, I just saw a fairy and I'm starting this show and I'm trying to learn while I talk to people. But yeah, the thorns are like, what is that? Is it like a defense? Is it literally a fairy fort? Like, is it a part? Is it the ramparts on the castle? Do you know what I mean? Is it the moat?
And there's also the mushroom rings.
You know what? You bring up the point that Susan talked about. She told an incredible story of two large mushroom rings on her neighbor's property that her dogs would not enter, and no one did go in. But what is your perspective on fairy rings, if I may ask? Because I'd love to put this episode along with Susan's back to back, since they belong together, I feel. Could you answer that if you have any perspectives on fairy rings, how they operate, what they're about? I would love to hear your ideas. You've got, again, such a great communication style, so just I'd love to let you do that if you could, please.
Well, thank you very much. Regarding fungi in nature, it seems that the fair folk certainly have their favorites, you know, with the thorned plants and trees and fungi. Um, there might be certain properties to them that they find useful for either setting up like gatherings or much in the same way we harvest from the environment for their properties that serve us. I think they do the same, and the ones that we find seemingly organized or heavily protected are indicative of something similar they're doing, just on a far more kinder and sustainable level. I think we could learn from that personally. And you know, you've also got your magic mushrooms that can help you get rather closely acquainted with such things, whether you want to or not. So there's also that. Yeah, that's my take on it.
You're the first guest to bring up magic mushrooms, or psilocybin, I guess would be the proper name. I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it in this interview, but I did used to run a medical cannabis dispensary.
You did.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, psilocybin or magic mushrooms here in British Columbia, Canada, pretty common. I would say not pedestrian, but on the level of generally accepted. As cannabis dispensaries moved from a black market, gray market area into fully legal, federally legal products, sort of behind them came up and still exist now many psilocybin or magic mushroom dispensaries that are operating currently. So there's a pretty big understanding and cultural reference to magic mushrooms for me, just based on my context. I will say for the audience, this is a kid-friendly show. So the top of the show, I'll make a little caveat about this for your listening, and I'll kind of say when you might want to turn the kids away at what time. But let's talk about this for a quick second if we can, because it's very interesting and I love that you brought it up. I wasn't going to bring this up myself ever, but since you have, and you've been delivering me like just wonderful segue after segue.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure, honestly, Misty. When you were saying like, you stay up at night thinking about fairies, I thought, oh, another person too.
Yes, we're out here.
And I'm a 44-year-old guy doing that, and I'm doing it because I saw one. And by the way, I think you can see one. I think others can see them. I think you can see them just like you can see a seagull. And I do think you've seen something performed by one, if not one itself. Because they are somehow inseparable from natural things. Back to magic mushrooms for a second. So a lot of people think when you take magic mushrooms, you get a trip, like it's something happening in your brain. Your brain is producing colors and tracers and all this sort of stuff. I don't know if I agree with that exactly, based on my own experiences of consuming them and based on the dialogues I've had with other people that seriously contemplate their consumption experiences. I think that the veil that you are describing becomes, consuming a psilocybin or magic mushroom, of which, by the way, just a side note, there does appear, if you look at this up, to be like a naturally occurring either DMT or psilocybin containing fungus or other naturally occurring plant containing one of those two substances, which are powerful, quote unquote, hallucinogenics. Those are occurring in every natural environment on Earth. And in particular, I mean, you can find like psilocybin mushrooms that are, black and oily in Hawaii, and you can find little tiny pinhead ones, in cow fields in the Fraser Valley here in British Columbia. And they range all over the planet to, Mexico, just everywhere. And there's like possibly dozens, if not more, varieties of these particular plants or these funguses, because they're not really a plant in the same sense that other photosynthesizing plants are. But when you take them, and I don't know if you have taken them or feel comfortable about discussing that, but I'll lead the conversation by talking about my own experiences. First of all, you get a totally heightened sense of living things, big time.
Yes. Can confirm.
Agreed, yeah, fully agreed. And it's not unpleasant. It's totally welcome. And it's not a hallucination, it's an enhanced perception. And I would go so far as to say, somehow, this might sound so strange, but I think they're kind of like a tech. Not like a tech like your Apple Watch, but like quantum physics is a baseline understanding that I like to bring to this. Like there's different things in quantum physics that explain this working, like basically that explain different realities and dimensions coexisting. So looking at it from that perspective, when you take a mushroom experience for something other than like a fabrication of your mind, and you look at it objectively as it's happening, you are experiencing like a tech interface that now the veil is way less present, if not totally gone. And in that experience, I want to just be really clear for both Misty and I. I'm not saying you take mushrooms and you magically see fairies and elves. It doesn't work like that. You get to see nature's undercurrent that is invisible to your naked eye on a daily basis. Like the plants look and appear as though they are breathing somewhat. They do appear to have almost breath to them. Like they're there. They're really there. And animals can become particularly interested in you when you've taken mushrooms, like your domestic pets. But outside of that, I've had a number of extremely difficult to describe close encounters with wild animals who have approached me when I'm in the natural setting and having also consumed mushrooms. And I would say that like you can also see like an aura or an energy ring to many things around you, both inanimate and animate objects, which I translate as like you're actually visually looking at their frequency. And so, I'm not advocating for drug use. In fact, I'm a sober person. I don't drink alcohol. My cannabis use is informed by serious injury. But if you have a safe format in which to consume mushrooms with an experienced person with you, with a clear understanding of what contextually you're getting into, it can be an extremely useful tool of reference to have had that experience as part of these discussions. Because many people listening to this show will be like, what are you talking about with all this strange visual phenomena you and your guests are trying to describe? But if you consume some mushrooms, you'll get a hint of it, for sure you will. Like you will get a look at what is not normally seen, and you will get to see what seeing something that is not normally seen looks like. And it's really hard to describe, but you can see it for yourself and you can be like, whoa, that's what's going on all the time. And actually most people who have a mushroom experience leave it feeling like, oh, I finally saw what I've always sensed. And for most people, it can be very uplifting. if not healing. And I'll just leave it there. And, I don't want to encourage, as part of this show's format, that usage as a way of accessing the fairy realm. I don't think that that's what I'm trying to say. But Misty brings up an extremely valid point. And so that's my perspective. I've sort of let off, like I said. If you feel comfortable at all, I know you mentioned a second ago you can confirm. Could you add any thoughts to that about what is seen and experienced when mushrooms are consumed? If you could, please, Misty. I would really appreciate that if you'd be so brave.
I certainly can. And I must chime in and agree with you. Safety first, kids. You're messing with your brain here, and some wonderful things can happen, but some pretty bad things can too. So please do not jump into this looking to go see an elf. If they want you to see them, they control that. You're not going to decide that. So don't don't do it for that. Anyhow, um, I can confirm everything you described because I have also um, indulged myself, and oh goodness, it's how do you explain something that is unexplainable? I I can certainly agree that about the animals becoming interested in you. We have a cat. She's a good cat, sweet, but she's the type, not very hands-on when it comes to affection. Becomes very interested in you, like will just stick by your side, like, while someone is having a journey. So that's true. And the things you see, if it does become visual for you, it 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 goes beyond just pretty colors. Uh, the things you see and feel is it. I have a way of describing it. I like to call it the everything of the all, and it feels like that's what I'm tuning into when I'm doing this. Um, it's like a this massive highway network of consciousness that you're just suddenly plugging into, and your perception is being lit up. And it, again, it's so very hard to put into words, but I I believe you hit many of the nails on the head about it already, and have an idea what I'm talking about. So I'll I'll leave it there, and I will say there has been some I've had journeys when I have experienced some weird stuff. I've written it off because I was clearly not sober, but I will say the things were weird. And I think the weirdness kind of like ramps up when your brain is in this state.
You touch on a lot of really important insights, not the least of which to double, triple down, play safe, as you say.
Yes.
Some of what's going on when mushrooms are consumed is enhanced perception, and some of what's going on when mushrooms are consumed is enhanced manifestation. And all of it is interlinked with vibration and the true nature of ourselves, which is the point of going down the road of exploring consciousness. Having said that, meditative practices which do not involve any psilocybin can absolutely bring you to the same plane, if not beyond, referring back principally to my first guest, Ron, who's an incredible resource for me and I maintain contact with on a regular basis, who has demonstrably and clearly made contact with the Fae realm, to the point where fairies are happy with him and join him in his home. He almost has a nursery for baby fairies going on.
Oh,
I know, isn't that great? Ron is so nice. He was a municipal works guy for his entire life, the least likely person that you would think to be into fairies. He was so good for me because I'm also not really a fairy person. I'm not. Prior to this, didn't care. Thought it was fun, or like if I had a girlfriend who was into Harry Potter, I'd sit through it and stuff, but that was the extent of my interest in anything that I thought fairies were part of. I've since come full circle and I'm like, whoa, fairies are non-taxonomically described energy beings, of which there are many. You and I are talking about the fabric of reality, both as a veil and as something that, can be understood or interpreted through use of particular practices. I said earlier, like a tech, like I don't want to mislead anybody. And I do actually think your message and point on this is the more strong one, which is like, just be very safe. I would also say just microdosing is fine, like tiny little infinitesimally small bits of psilocybin will still trigger the areas in your brain that are responsible for this type of perception. The smaller the dose, the least likely you're going to get into that unhinged manifestation side of things. The larger the dose, the more you're going to figure out what you as a person are really capable of conjuring up. And I'll just leave it there. So that's a really valuable part of this conversation, and one I'm glad has finally happened. I knew drugs was going to come up as it relates to perception. And I don't want to discount that, because perception is because perception is something able to be manipulated. And the most healthy way to do that is through meditative practices and other benevolent and good practices. If you can have the privilege to engage in that stuff, to do good works, to meditate, to focus on expanding your consciousness, to focus on expanding your love and benevolence for all things and projecting it outwards, I truly think fairies are going to pick up on that and come to you.
Love, love is certainly at the heart of how we should approach things in life. I feel is what I wanted to say.
Love is an important factor in these events. Many of my guests, including myself, experienced our fairy sighting when we were at a peak time of our happiness. And I was with somebody I really love, and we were in one of the best moments we've ever had together. And, Ezra, my guest from New Zealand, was like with his 15, 16-year-old girlfriend to be, like one of the first times he'd ever gotten her alone, out on the beach. And they were having a little makeout. And like fairies are extremely curious about us. And they're extremely curious about us when we're at our best. And I think up to a certain age, all children have uninterrupted interfacing with the realm that fairies exist in. And I think, unfortunately, it isn't until we get schooled out of our natural abilities that we lose that sense of the truth. And maybe some of us in later life, like me at 44, gets another look at it. Or in my case, maybe a look at it for the first time, because I never had an imaginary friend as a kid. I have no recollection of that at all whatsoever. Wasn't part of my thing. And I had like there was some difficult circumstances in my home, and I didn't even have one to like cope. I just didn't have an imaginary friend at all. It wasn't part of my lexicon. Furthermore, like I said, fairies weren't part of it either. And so, it can surprise a person where they find themselves. And sometimes when I promote this show on like Reddit or something, people will just like jump on me, and I will just often say when I'm feeling jumped on, hey man, you could find yourself on the other side of this comment thread. Not so fast. Like, come on. Like you could like have a little empathy. I don't even want to do this podcast necessarily. I have to. It's totally different than wanting to.
I fully understand that. And I agree. As I think I mentioned before, I've always been a very logical person, to the point where it often can take the magic out of things, because I'm going to find a way to reason something away. I was the kid who would tell you Santa Claus isn't real. As sad as that sounds, that's just how in touch with reality and chemistry and cause and effect I was ever since then. But I think it would be in our best interest to embrace that we are far from knowing what's going on, and really that just makes life so beautiful and interesting. This mystery, this otherness that is yet to be discovered and maybe never will, and that's fine.
Misty, again, I'll say this because I do mean it, and I like to acknowledge my guests for for themselves. You're clearly logical, first of all. You're clearly thoughtful. You're not rushing in any of your thinking. Everyone listening can tell that. You're extremely thoughtful on top of being logical. So, like, there is an emotional tenderness to your logic that is unmistakable in the way that you communicate as well. And I just really appreciate you making that distinction towards the end here, because, like, it's needed, right? We've talked about drugs. We've talked about fairies. But listen to us. Listen to Misty especially, right? She's yet another sober, articulate, thoughtful, able to determine fact from reality, analytical mind possessing witness of something extraordinary. And she has a confirmation from her parent, I should say. She also has confirmation in the form of a flower which is pressed in a book, no longer in her possession. But this was a real event that occurred as a miracle and struck both her and her parent. That's where we started this conversation. So for that reason, everything discussed here today is valid with that context delivered. With all that said, Misty, out of respect for your time, out of respect for the audience's time, you've answered all of my questions that I could possibly ask about your incredible sighting of this late season, out of season bloom of a rose, which I do think is a remarkable and possibly angelic, possibly fae related, but at the very least, yet another confirming event of the true nature of reality being far stranger than we might know, which you also said very beautifully a moment ago. I feel happy about this conversation. I feel happy about how deep we got. And I, most of all, just feel really happy with you trusting me to share all this with. And I thank you for that, because I am sincerely trying to pursue my own way of understanding this. And I read everything I could. I watched every video I could. Didn't do it for me. I want to talk to people that have seen stuff themselves and who are equally uninitiated in it as I am. And I mean, you've got some more knowledge than I do, obviously, but when I say uninitiated, I just mean we're not prepared for these experiences when they happen. And when a real strange thing happens, it sticks with you emotionally forever. And that's the hallmark of one of those real events. And you've definitely, I think, tripled down on this being something that sticks out in your mind, both with your parents' confirmation and with the words you've shared with us here tonight. And so, Misty, with all that said, and my deep gratitude extended, what I'd like to do here is I'll just move to say a few words as we end this episode as a reminder to the audience of some important things. And then I'll be handing over the last word of the show to the guest, as I like to do. So for the audience listening, just a reminder that if you've had an encounter with a strange and unusual experience, or a fairy in particular, elf, gnome, interdimensional, just reach out to me. My email address is encounters@fascinatingfae.com. On the fascinatingfae.com website, I put liner notes. So basically like pictures that people have drawn where they try to draw what they saw. Sometimes I'll put some links to some of the stuff we discuss. Maybe I'll put some links to mushroom stuff, for example, here on this episode. So if you do head on to fascinatingfae.com, that's the type of information that you'll find. There's nothing for sale here. This is a free podcast that is derived out of passion. So I do hope you get a chance to check that out and enjoy some of that additional information. Misty, thanks for your patience as I remind the audience listening of those important parts of this show's process. And so with all that said, and my deep appreciation for your time, again, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. I'd love to ask you to share any thoughts that you would like, and then just let our guests go for the evening when you're done, please.
And thank you so much for having me on. This is my first podcast experience being a part of one, and I couldn't have asked for something better. This was beautiful, wonderful. We talked about many things that light up my day-to-day life. You've been a kind, very generous, patient, wonderfully open-minded host. Couldn't have asked for better. If I were to impart any last thoughts or feelings before we wrap this up, I would say I would take a note from a movie I watched, Everything Everywhere All at Once. This wonderfully fun, unhinged movie. Loved it. And my favorite message from it was just be kind, especially when we don't know what's going on. The world is big and beautiful, and mysterious and wonderful, and I think the other intelligences that we share this space with, they will see what you're about and they will act accordingly. I would not encourage going to and looking for them out of respect for them and safety for yourself. But encounters do happen. So at any given time, just be kind and respectful. And I don't think you could really go wrong.
After dark, when the light has left us, we'll be on the move tonight. Through the park, past the frozen people, we leave behind these city lights. And as the sun comes up this hill, you don't know what you've been missing. After the daylight comes around, you do what you will, play your part and learn and listen, up until the day that you are found, when your daylight comes around. In the night, we cross the open plains and reach the mountains by the day. Into the sea, we meet our ship's commander. We set our sails for far away, so far away. And as the sun comes up this hill, you don't know what you've been missing. After the daylight comes around, you do what you will, play your part and learn and listen, up until the day